Krishna, everyone. A warm welcome back again. Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pashtaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharine Vivishesha Shunyavadi Paschata Deshatarine. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. The Vaishnava poet Surdas has written, I offer my obeisances to my spiritual master, who gave me beautiful kantimala, effulgent tilak, the beautiful form of a devotee, and who offered me his shelter. In one of his hands he is holding my hand, and with his other hand he is holding the lamp of knowledge, which helps me to cross over the dark ocean of the material world. My Guru deserves the greatest respect, because only he can rescue one in the blinking of an eye. I bow down to him again and again and again. Jai Srila Prabhupada. So after a bit of a break, we were in America for a few weeks. We're continuing with our seminar on Lord Chaitanya's famous journey to Vrindavan. This will take us a few classes actually, and then we'll return to the Vrindavan pastimes. So we gave the first lecture while in America, and this is part 2. And as I mentioned in part 1, we are speaking from a number of authoritative sources, including Caitanya Charitamrita, Madhya Lila chapter 17, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's book, Gauranga Lilamrita, and Gaura Lila Shagar by Lalit Kishore Das, who I mentioned before was a contemporary poet of Srila Narottam Das Thakur. So in our first lecture, we discussed Lord Chaitanya's attempts to go to Vrindavan several times, and how he was finally successful in beginning his journey there from Jagannath Puri with one servant, Balabhadra Bhattacharya. On Mahaprabhu's first attempt to go to Vrindavan, he himself abandoned the trip because so many devotees were following him. I was reading thousands actually. In Caitanya Charitamrita, Madhya Lila chapter 16, Mahaprabhu says, I then understood that I was going to Vrindavan like a magician with his show, and this is certainly not good. No one should go to Vrindavan with so many men. He continues, I then began to consider that Vrindavan is a very solitary place. It is invincible and very difficult to attain. I therefore decided to go there alone, or at the utmost with only one person. Then he says, Madhavendra Puri went to Vrindavan alone, and Krishna, on the pretext of giving him milk, granted him an audience. So therein, Mahaprabhu said, no one should go to Vrindavan with so many men. And it's a fact, because traditionally, Vrindavan is meant for bhajan. I remember when my dear god sister, Daivashakti Mataji, she asked Srila Prabhupada one time in the early 70s if she could open a preaching center at Radhakund. And Prabhupada thought for a moment and he said, no, Radhakund is for bhajan. Also one time, Srila Prabhupada encouraged his householder disciples to settle in Mayapur and the unmarried men and women to serve in Vrindavan. Of course, we know that eventually Srila Prabhupada welcomed all his disciples and everyone to come to Vrindavan. And that's made very clear in the 5th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. I think it's 5.13.8. There's an immortal purport there in which Prabhupada states as follows. One must go to the Vrindavan forest and take shelter of Govinda. That will make one happy. The International Society for Krishna Consciousness is therefore constructing a Krishna Balaram temple to invite all its members as well as outsiders to come and live peacefully in a spiritual atmosphere. That will help one become elevated to the transcendental world and return home back to Godhead. Thank you, Sri Prabhupada. But even then, the meditation and focus while in Vrindavan, we should try to make it very deep. Meaning, where can I find Krishna? That's the mood of great devotees. Vrindavan is the playground of God, so he's there, so we go to find Krishna. Like Prabhupada, I've said many times, Prabhupada, when he first went to Vrindavan, he was expecting to see Krishna jump out from behind any bush, he said. Or like the 6 Goswamis, who were chanting very loudly everywhere in Vrindavan. They were shouting, Hey Radhe Braja Devike Chalalite, Hey Nanda Sunu Kuta, Shri Govardhana Kalpa Padape Tale Kalindivana Kute. O Queen of Vrindavan Radharani, O Lalita, O son of Nanda Maharaj, where are you all now? Are you just on the hill of Govardhan, or are you under the trees on the banks of the Jamuna? Where are you? These were their moods in executing Krishna consciousness. Sad Goswami Ashtakam. So, in this way, Mahaprabhu concluded, quote, I have therefore resolved to go alone, or at the utmost with one servant. In this way, my journey to Vrindavan will be beautiful. And as we discussed in our first lecture in the series, that most fortunate person to go with Mahaprabhu, who can imagine, was Balabhadra Bhattacharya. So, in the last lecture, we concluded they were just leaving Jagannath Puri. So after leaving Jagannath Puri, Balabhadra Bhattacharya and Lord Caitanya, after a day's journey, reached a place called Rai Ramanand Bagicha. Rai Ramanand Bagicha, meaning literally the garden of Ramananda Rai. Now, as many of us know, Ramananda Rai was Maharaj Bhattaputra's governor. Maharaj Bhattapudra was the king. So Ramananda Rai was a governor of the king in a town called Vidyanagar. And later he became one of the ministers in the court of Maharaj Bhattapudra. So a special personality, Ramananda Rai, or both of them. More important, perhaps, is in Gaura Gunadesha Dipika, it is stated that some people hold that Ramananda Rai was an incarnation of Lalita Sakhi, while others say he was an incarnation of Vishaka Sakhi. Chaitanya Charitamrita states that Ramananda Rai was one of the Lord's 3.5 most intimate associates. The other two were Swarup Damodar Goswami and Sikhi Mahiti, and Sikhi Mahiti's sister was the half person, but just as important. So, Ramananda Rai, knowing that Mahaprabhu and Balabhadra Bhattacharya were traveling in that direction, had arranged for Lord Chaitanya to take rest in his garden, in that property that belonged to him. In the Vrindavan Research Center, we discovered actually the history of this property belonging to Ramananda Rai, officially called Rai Ramananda Bagicha. We actually found the history, which is as follows. It's really interesting. One time, Maharaj Bhattapudra, in appreciation for a battle that Ramananda Rai had fought and won, gave Ramananda Rai this piece of land, essentially a large garden. It's near the present-day Cuttack, the town. And I was reading that after that, Ramananda Rai would secretly give the money that came from renting that property out to others to Swarup Damodar, Lord Chaitanya's personal servant, for the service of Mahaprabhu. The taxes, you could say, or the rent. From that property, Ramananda Rai would give it to Swarup Damodar for the service of Mahaprabhu, secretly. I say secretly because Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu didn't know where that money was coming from. Ramananda Roy and Swarup Damodar didn't reveal this to Mahaprabhu because Lord Chaitanya, as a sannyasi, didn't want to use, you could say, government or royal money in his service. He didn't associate with kings and go to palaces and things like that. So he didn't want, he wouldn't approve that this money was coming from this land for his service. However, his travels as a sannyasi, especially I was reading, when he went to South India, it cost money. Recently, when I was in Orissa, I read in the newspaper, it was the headlines, that a copper plate was discovered in Orissa in an archaeological expedition, a dig, on which it was written, it's really interesting, that Maharaj Prataprudra himself gave funds for Mahaprabhu's travels to India. Not only did Ramananda Roy give money, but even Maharaj Prataprudra gave money. This was on this copper plate that they found, in Archaeological Society. It's interesting. And like Ramananda Roy, Maharaj Prataprudra was also a great devotee of the Lord, although the Leela was that Mahaprabhu would not, didn't favor to come and see him and spend time with him in his palace because he was a sannyasi, but actually he was a great devotee of the Lord. This we know from Gaura Gonadesha Dipika, verse 118, where it's written, quote, Indradyumna, who previously worshipped Lord Jagannath, was born as Maharaj Prataparudra, with the same opulences as Indra himself. It's really interesting. And furthermore, I discovered that Maharaj Prataparudra took initiation from Kashi Mishra Pandit. We spoke about that previously. Mahaprabhu stayed in the home of Kashi Mishra when he was in Jagannath Puri for 18 years. In that home, Kashi Mishra had that room, Gambhira, where Mahaprabhu experienced all his ecstatic symptoms. Now, another very interesting fact that we found in our research is that when the famous deity of Shakshi Gopal, that famous witness deity, came to Orissa, because the Brahmana boy asked the deity to come from Vrindavan to Orissa to stand as a witness in a trial. So when Shakshi Gopal, following that boy, came to Orissa, I was reading in the Institute, before being placed where he's worshipped now, that deity was temporarily worshipped in Maharaj Prataparudra's palace. Historical records show that. And when Maharaj Prataparudra invited Lord Chaitanya to visit Shakshi Gopal upon his arrival, Mahaprabhu again declined the invitation because it wasn't proper for him as a sannyasi to go to a royal palace. Now, when his devotee, Maharaj Prataparudra, heard this, he said, a palace becomes royal when the king is present, but when the king is not present, the palace simply becomes a monument. And he sent that message to Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And he asked, Maharaj Prataparudra asked Ramananda Roy to please convince Mahaprabhu with this logic to come and take darshan of Shakshi Gopal. So he left the palace. Maharaj, he left for a week or something. And historical records there in Orissa show that Mahaprabhu actually went and visited or took darshan, let us say, of Shakshi Gopal in the palace. It's written that when he came, he danced ecstatically before the Lord there. So all the followers of our beloved Mahaprabhu in Orissa, they say that the deity of Shakshi Gopal is famous as the witness deity, not only because he acted as a witness for the Brahmana boy as described in Chaitanya Charitamrita, but also because Shakshi Gopal witnessed himself, the deity, the dancing of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. They say that's why he's Shakshi Gopal, because he witnessed the dancing of Lord Chaitanya. Now, it's also written that when Maharaj Prataparudra experienced, later on, when he experienced separation from Lord Chaitanya, he would go sometimes to take darshan of the Shakshi Gopal deity, where he eventually was taken and worshipped. Because it's said that the eyes of Shakshi Gopal act like a mirror. And when Mahaprabhu was dancing in front of Shakshi Gopal, his image, Mahaprabhu's image, was captured in Shakshi Gopal's eyes. And when taking darshan of Shakshi Gopal's eyes, Maharaj Prataparudra's feelings of separation from Lord Chaitanya were pacified, because in those mirror-like eyes which captured the form of Mahaprabhu dancing, he saw, Maharaj Prataparudra saw Mahaprabhu dancing in those eyes. So his separation was mitigated, pacified. That's so much nectar. Hare Krishna. So anyway, back to the pastime where Ramananda Roy had arranged for Lord Chaitanya to take rest in his garden by Ramananda Bagicha, soon after Mahaprabhu and Balabhadra Bhattacharya had left Puri for Vrindavan, actually the first day you could say. It's described that as Lord Chaitanya lay down in that garden, tired from the first day of travel, on a special cloth, Balabhadra Bhattacharya started massaging his lotus feet. And seeing Mahaprabhu exhausted from an entire day of travel, he said to Mahaprabhu, "My dear Lord, I can understand from your deep breathing that you're really tired, you're exhausted." But then Lord Chaitanya revealed the real reason for his deep breathing when he said, "My dear Bala, the truth is I cannot live without Lord Jagannath. At the moment I am between Puri and Vrindavan. I am like a man who wants to achieve the stars, but is between the sky and earth and not able to benefit from either." Then pausing for a moment, taking another deep breath, he continued, "I am very grateful for my mother. Whatever I am doing in my life and whatever little amount of Krishna bhakti I have, I've attained it only by her grace. Krishna left his mother Yasoda to give the absolute truth to the fallen conditioned souls. I also had to leave my mother for sharing the glories of Radha and Krishna and their love to all living entities. But Mother Sachi always stays within my heart." So after hearing Mahaprabhu's words, Balabhadra Bhattacharya offered him some, I was reading, Mahaprasadam of Lord Jagannath that was given by Sri Gadadhar Pandit for Lord Chaitanya. And when Mahaprabhu heard this, that this prasad had come from Gadadhar Pandit, he said, "Sri Gadadhar is my eternal soulmate. He knows what pain I am going through in separation from Krishna. When I was a Grihastra, I used to cry day and night in separation from Krishna. One day Gadadhar came to my residence and I gave him a Shalagram Shila. Actually, I gave all the Shalagram Shilas worshipped previously by my father and grandfather. I had faith that Gadadhar would worship them with love and devotion." And then remembering Sri Gadadhar Pandit, a member of Panchatattva, and as we know, an incarnation of Srimati Radharani, this caused Mahaprabhu to close his eyes and stop speaking. And as a result, everything went silent. And the Acharyas describe it as, quote, "the calm before the storm of Mahabhava." Mahabhava is the highest ecstatic love for Krishna that Radha experiences. So the calm before the storm of Mahabhava. And after some moments, Mahaprabhu opened his eyes and in the mood of Radharani started calling to Krishna. Now the acharyas say this was not unusual, for a primary reason for Krishna's descent, as we know, into this world as Lord Chaitanya was to understand and experience Radharani's love for him. So it's not unusual he's calling out like that. And at this point, Balabhadra tried to control Mahaprabhu's ecstatic symptoms by holding his hand and then finally embracing him. And after some time, Lord Chaitanya called out in the mood of Radha, "O Krishna, O Govinda, please show me your pastimes in the flower groves of Vrindavan's forests, in the waters of the Jamuna, and within the caves of Govardhan Hill." Now, then something really interesting happened. Suddenly, the weather started changing. And as dark clouds appeared in the sky, and as the sun hid behind the clouds, because of the darkness, Lord Chaitanya's golden limbs assumed a bluish black color. And instead of chanting Krishna and Govinda's names, as Radha would do, he started calling out Radharani's names as Krishna would do, because now his complexion was dark. We started calling out Krishna's names, calling out Radha's names as Krishna would do. He called out, "O Radhe, daughter of King Vrishabhanu, rosebud, rosebud of the garden of Rasa, please reveal your beauty to me." Then, just then, actually, the sun broke through the clouds, and revealing Lord Chaitanya's golden form, his mood changed again, and he started crying in separation from Krishna. So like this, back and forth. At one moment Mahaprabhu is experiencing Radha's love for Krishna, which he wanted to know. And at the next moment, he's experiencing Krishna's love for Radha. Now, both are possible for Lord Chaitanya because, well, in Chaitanya Bhagavat, we've heard it said, Shri Krishna Chaitanya Radhe Krishna Nahi Anga. Lord Chaitanya is none other than the combined form of Radha and Krishna. And in Chaitanya Charitamrita Adi Lila 456 we hear, to taste this divine mellow, Shri Radha and Krishna have appeared in one body as Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who appeared in Mayapur Dham. And I also found a quote by Sri Damodar Goswami, who said one time, Radha and Krishna assumed oneness in the form of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And I read another acharya. He wrote, it's really beautiful. As the wind comes from Jagannath Puri, love for Sri Radha overwhelms Mahaprabhu. And as the wind comes from the direction of Vrindavan, love for Krishna overwhelms him. And as Mahaprabhu was inundated by this love, it's described his deep breaths increased. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur describes. His deep breaths increased. And as he inhaled, he experienced Krishna Bhav. And as he exhaled, he experienced Radha Bhav. Hare Krishna. Of course, these are very deep subject matters. And probably better, we should try to understand them better by studying Srila Prabhupada's purports and explanations in chapters 14 and 15 of Chaitanya Charitamrita Adi Lila. These subject matters are discussed by Prabhupada. Those chapters are entitled Lord Chaitanya's feelings of separation from Krishna, and the other chapter is entitled The Transcendental Madness of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Prabhupada goes deep into that. So, after witnessing Lord Chaitanya's ecstatic symptoms of love of God, Balabhadra Bhattacharya wrote a letter to Sri Gadadhar Pandit and sent it back to Jagannath Puri with a messenger. And I found the letter in the research center, in the books I quoted earlier at the beginning of this lecture. In his letter he wrote, "Dear Panditji, today I witnessed the prema, the love of Viharini Radha being separated from Sri Radha and Virahi Krishna being separated from Krishna, all together in one body as Caitanya Mahaprabhu. Unable to pacify Mahaprabhu, your servant Balabhadra cries and weeps in helplessness." Now it's written that after reading this letter, Sri Gadadhar, he became anxious as to how Balabhadra Bhattacharya, could take care of Mahaprabhu all alone. So many things are happening. He's got the money to provide all the provisions and whatever is required, as we discussed, but all these ecstatic emotions, how's he going to juggle all these things? Gadadhar Pandit became a little anxious. So nice to see into the daily lives of these great devotees by previous acharyas. So the next day, after walking for many hours, Balabhadra Bhattacharya and Mahaprabhu arrived at the village of Priyangara. I saw it on a map, Priyangara. And they were greeted by a large group of villagers who were just transfixed, it's described, seeing the beauty of Lord Chaitanya. They just saw this, the effulgent golden avatar, and they became motionless, just transfixed. And Lord Chaitanya, after eating some sweet berries and drinking bale juice, in his continuous ecstatic state, he asked Balabhadra to look at the map and tell him how many hours they were away from Vrindavan. Although they were only 2 days or so into a 3-month journey, he's asking this question. And Balabhadra didn't want to disappoint or discourage Mahaprabhu. So he said, Kachu Kacha Kshane. Kachu Kacha Kshane, which means we'll reach in a short time. But knowing that he had not been able to tell Lord Chaitanya the actual fact, they were still far from Vrindavan, Balabhadra Bhattacharya, it's very touching, he started crying uncontrollably while sitting under a tall tree. Now the people of Priyanagar, they say that tree, which was irrigated, they say, by the tears of Balabhadra Bhattacharya, it still exists. They say it was irrigated by the tears of Balabhadra Bhattacharya. It still exists. And it's said that pilgrims come regularly to embrace that tree and dig up the earth where he cried and take a little dust and put it in their mouths. When I heard that, I think, I have to go there. I also want to embrace that tree and take some dust to become purified, so that my love for Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and service to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu by spreading the message of Lord Chaitanya under Prabhupada's direction all over the world, that opportunity will be there as long as possible. That's what I love to do. So after some time, Balabhadra Bhattacharya, it's described, he wiped his tears away and went to a nearby pond and drank some water to refresh himself. Then he came in front of Mahaprabhu and said, Mahaprabhu, we should continue now before it gets dark. Now thinking that Vrindavan was not far away, it's described Mahaprabhu started walking very fast in hopes of reaching Vrindavan before it became dark. But in reality, the acharyas say they still had, what's interesting, 3 months and 56 stops to go. That's how it's put in Shastra. They had 3 months and 56 stops to go. So that night, they slept under a mango tree. But in reality, neither Balabhadra nor Mahaprabhu slept. Balabhadra didn't sleep because he was in anxiety what to say to Mahaprabhu the next morning should Mahaprabhu ask again, how far is Vrindavan? And Mahaprabhu, he didn't sleep because, well, he was so anxious to get there. So next day, they walked 15 krosh, which I calculated to be 40 kilometers without stopping. And they just crossed over the border of Orissa. That's as far. They crossed over, you've seen the map of India, Vrindavan, they just crossed the border of Orissa. So our poet, Leta Kishore Das, he concludes in his account of this part of Lord Chaitanya's journey to Vrindavan by writing as follows, and I'll finish today. We've got 3 months and 56 stops to go, so there's more nectar coming from us. He writes so beautifully. Quote, may my body be the bridge from Puri to Vrindavan that Mahaprabhu can cross in just one breath. All along the way, I, Lalit Kishore Das, hanker to hold an umbrella over Mahaprabhu's head while fanning him with a chamara fan and singing the sweet holy names of Krishna to make his journey through the country easy and smooth. Obeisances to the poet, to Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, to Sri Caitanya Charitamrita, and all the devotees who took part in those pastimes. Hare Krishna. So again, we have a long journey ahead of us, but a very blissful journey, and we'll continue in a few days' time. Good to be back again, and I'll see everyone soon with part 3. Shri Shri Gaura Nitai ki, Shri Shri Krishna Balaram ki, Shri Shri Radha Shama Sundar ki, Vrindavaneshwari Shrimati Radharani ki, Jagannath Puri Dham ki, Jagannath Subhadra Balaram ki, Shri Shri Gaura Nitai ki, Mayapur Dham ki, Shri Krishna Sankirtanya ki, back home, back to Godhead ki Jai. Take all the fallen conditioned souls with us ki Jai. Shira Prabhupada, revealer of the Dham ki Jai Go Premanandi. Jai Jai Sri Sri Radhe Shan. Hare Krishna.